Hello. In this course we're going to be looking at the gospel, that is to say, the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, little is known of Jesus for the first 30 years of his life, during which we assume that he worked in his adoptive father Joseph's carpentry shop. The stories of his childhood in Luke speak much more about his mother, Mary, the chief of the Christian saints, because, after all, God the Father in the story had chosen her to raise the child who, the angel Gabriel announced to her in a vision, was none other than his only son. Around the age of 30, Jesus spent his 40 days of prayer and testing in the wilderness. He was then baptized in the River Jordan by John, the leader of an ascetic Jewish sect, who proclaimed Jesus what the Jews call in Hebrew the Messiah, meaning the anointed one, or in Greek the Christos, which is where we get the word Christ. The Jewish scriptures had prophesied the coming of this Messiah, and the people had been waiting for generations. Now, some understood the scriptures promising a king like their ancient King David, who would overthrow the Roman occupiers of their land. But not everybody. Other Jewish groups were expecting more of a spiritual leader who would liberate them, that is, free them from the slavery of sin. After his baptism, Jesus began preaching and recruiting. He went around the synagogues, places where the many Jews who lived far away from the temple in Jerusalem gathered together to pray. He already had the recommendation of John the Baptist to build on, and it seems that his message attracted tradesmen, really, of modest education, mostly fishermen at first, and, somewhat controversially at that time, also women as well. Unlike other teachers at the time who sought influence with rich and powerful patrons, Jesus spent his time far away from the southern capital of Jerusalem, up in the unfashionable north where people spoke a bit funny, consorting with outcasts, prostitutes, lepers, and of course the hated tax collectors, who were stooges of the Roman regime. Remember, the Roman Empire ruled Judea and Palestine at the time. Jesus' teaching was even more controversial than the company that he kept. He taught that the rule of God would and should overtake the rule of earthly kings and emperors, and he called this the kingdom of heaven. Through repentance, that is, turning back towards God and away from sin, and through baptism, even provincial nobodies, the poor, could enjoy the messianic kingdom of heaven that this Jesus was proclaiming. This did not go down with the Romans, nor did it go down very well with the religious authorities in Jerusalem either. His fellow Jews applauded him at first, celebrated him, taking his message as further sign of his messianic status. Surely he was the one who would overthrow the oppressor. But little by little he provoked his own people too, both by words and actions. He preached against the hypocrisy of the religious leaders of the day, and far worse than that, he seemed to be breaking their law, and even worse may be to put himself above the law or in place of the law. Now remember that for the Jewish people, the law was not some man-made legislation. This was God's own law, the Torah, revealed hundreds of years before Jesus to Moses. So when Jesus started performing miraculous healings on the sacred Sabbath day of rest, when he started calling God Father and taught that children should fight the injustice of their biological parents, or when he said that following the letter of the law would get you nowhere with God unless the fundamental law of love was written in your hearts, well, this caused trouble for himself and for all those people who associated themselves with him, for his disciples, his followers, and especially for the 12 apostles closest to him. But it got worse. Sometimes people actually prostrated, that is, they fell down on their faces before him, which is worship that Jewish people should give only to God. And he didn't stop them. Then, according to St. John's Gospel, he kept using the divine name of I am, that unspeakably holy name, Yahweh, which God had spoken to Moses from the fire of a burning bush. And he's using this name about himself. He said he, Jesus, would judge the world at the end of time, which was something Jewish people believed only God could do. So for mainstream Jewish people, for strict monotheists, believers in only one God, this was blasphemy. Jesus seemed to be putting himself in God's place. So who was this Jesus? And what was his gospel, his good news? Is it really good news for everyone? Was Jesus a rebel? These are some of the questions that we're going to think about in this course, and I hope you enjoy it.